Hey guys, it's Dr. Justin Marcagiani here. Today's video is going to be on burping. Why are you burping so much? We're going to dive in. Before we do, please put your comments down below and things that have caused you to burp and what's allowed you to feel better and relieve it over time. What's the root for you? Really curious. Also smash that like button. Really appreciate it. Give me a share while you're doing that. So first off, what is burping? So a couple things. If you are hydrating too much at a meal and or you're drinking too much carbonated water with a meal, of course, burping is going to happen. So usually when you're having gas from the mouth up, right, that's belching, burping, it's going to be some level of indigestion in the stomach. Of course, you can consume, like if I did too much of my Topo Chico, right, before a meal or even during it, you're going to have some CO2 from the bubbles, of course, right? But if we put too much water in our tummy while we're eating and when food's digesting, that's going to raise our pH up, right? Water's got a pH of around 7-ish, and our stomach's about a 1.5 or 2. So it's pretty acidic in our stomach, and we need that good hydrochloric acid, which is that nice low acidic pH, right? Between 1 and 7, and 1.5 or 2 is very acidic. That acidity is going to activate our proteolytic enzyme. So if we don't have enough good acidity and enzyme activation, we're not going to break down our food. So those foods are more likely to ferment, rancidify, and putrefy. So ferment is basically carbohydrates not being broken down. They're essentially producing gases as they kind of rot, so to speak, and kind of stay there. So will protein, and so will fat. Think of it as rotting protein, rotting fat, rotting carbohydrate. And so gases, of course, are going to be produced because of that. Now, if we have things like gastroparesis happening, gastroparesis is like a delayed emptying of the stomach due to some kind of paralytic nature, whether it's autoimmune, whether there's some component of damage to the nerves. All those things are at play. Now, what could drive that? Usually it's going to be SIBO, some kind of bacterial overgrowth, some kind of H. pylori, maybe fungal overgrowth. Obviously, not enough acidity can cause food to sit in there too long because we need good acidity to kind of get that food mixed up, get the enzymes activated, and having low acidity or having not enough acidity can definitely delay gastric emptying. So that's a big component. Now, usually gut stress, gut inflammation can usually throw off motility. Usually extreme gut stress, like an infection a lot of times, can cause diarrhea, right? And that's obviously the faster end of the bowel movement side. Pure liquid, we're going to have absorption of food and electrolyte problems, and that's going to create a whole host of other problems. Sometimes it can be on the slower side. Usually more chronic stuff tends to be more on the slower side, and you can see gastroparesis. You can see the low enzymes, the low acids. You can see food allergies. You can see infections like H. pylori. You can see infections like SIBO, infections like SIFO or small intestinal fungal overgrowth. All those are at play. So when I look at a patient, we're going to work on cutting out the fermentable foods. Foods that ferment easier, we're going to work on cutting those things out. That can help decrease the burping out of the gates. Usually if we're burping, it's going to be a lot of times some kind of a hydrogen gas a lot of times. It could be more methane stuff, but usually more hydrogen. It could be on that side of the fence and just maybe a lot of CO2 as well from H. pylori. Typically when that fermentation issue starts to go into the intestinal tract, that's where we start seeing flatulence, right? And the more kind of sulfury smelling flatulence is going to be more methane based. And the more neutral type of flatulence is going to be more hydrogen-based. And usually FODMAPs play a really big role. So one of the first things we do, especially when we have bloating, and a lot of times acid reflux, or I should say bloating or burping, and a lot of times we'll see acid reflux along with that, is cut down the fermentables, right? Look at the FODMAPs, the fermentable oligo, disaccharide, mono, and polyol. Cut those foods down. Look at enzymes, look at acids, look at the various different infections that could be at play. We may also do things that are natural motility compounds. We may do things like bitters, gentian, chamomile, ginger, anise, orange peel. We may do, ginger's really good, so I'll do my ginger tea with some manuka honey. Manuka is a nice natural kind of mild antibacterial. It can be pretty soothing, so if there's a lot of raw gut inflammation, that can be helpful. We may add in some HCl, depending on how raw the gut is. We may add in some enzymes. We may provide some natural motility compounds like the ginger, like 5-HTP, like carnitine. It can be very helpful at supporting the gut motility. Just making sure good things with our life are in place, meaning we're not overly stressed. We're not eating when we're stressed. We're not overly stimulating ourselves by watching TV or working while we eat. We really want that time to be stress-free when we eat. So I'd say hydrate before you eat, maybe 15 minutes or so. Go into your meal in a very stress-free environment. Maybe put some classical music on, just relax, do a little meditation or prayer, or just focus on all the things that you have gratitude for in your life. Kind of go into your meal in a more sympathetic or parasympathetic relaxation kind of state. Good nasal breathing, good belly breathing. So deep breath into the nose to really get the parasympathetic nervous system response dialed in. So you're getting a lot of the enzymes and the acids and the digestion already going, because the parasympathetics play such an important role in digestion. And then, of course, you may have to look deeper with diet changes, different supplementation, and, of course, looking at the various infections. And again, any of my listeners know the 6 R's is kind of how I do it. First R, remove the bad foods. Second R, replace enzymes and potentially acids and bile support. Third R, work on repairing the gut lining and hormones. Fourth R, work on removing infections. That comes later because dealing with infections can be stressful and inflammatory on the body. So you want to build up a foundation for that. Some people get worse, significantly worse, if we go after infections first. And then fifth R, repopulation, reinoculation of good bacteria, especially if you notice burping is getting worse when you're consuming fermentable, like healthy, so to speak, probiotic-rich foods like sauerkraut or kimchi or low-sugar kombuchas or fermented pickles. If those kind of foods are making you worse, you know there's a FODMAP issue. You know there's a potential SIBO or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth issue. And so depending on what the issue is, there's different herbs we may use to help address that, whether it's berberine, garlic, oil of oregano, silver, ginger, other herbs, berberines, mastic, just going off my head, olive leaf, artemisia, dill. There's a lot of different herbs we use, maybe 15, 20 different herbs that make golden seal's excellent too, that are very helpful at knocking down that overgrowth. And it depends upon what is the actual imbalance. We may hit that specifically. So that kind of gives you a good idea out of the gates. And again, if you've kind of made some of the simple diet changes and you're getting a little bit overwhelmed and you're not getting the results you want, definitely reach out to someone like myself. You can click down below to schedule a consult with myself or colleagues that do this kind of work all over the country. They're here to help y'all. So if you're getting a little frustrated, that's the best avenue to go. You go the conventional medicine route. For the most part, there's going to be some kind of laxative support, maybe some kind of an antacid. Maybe you just slap an IBS diagnosis on you if you have a lot of burping and you have constipation. Maybe they'll throw an IBS C or D diagnosis at you, and that's it. And you're kind of stuck, and they'll just give a little bit of symptom management for whatever symptoms are happening. But then you're kind of stuck. And if you don't have any irritable bowel disease like Crohn's or ulcerative colitis or something like that, you're kind of just stuck. And so most people listening to podcasts and videos like this, they want root cause solutions because they're tired of just covering things up with a lipstick, so to speak. So again, this is Dr. J. Hope you enjoyed this content. If you do, put your comments below. Give me a thumbs up and a like. Really appreciate it. Let me dive into some questions for y'all. I know you guys have been waiting patiently. I'd like to see what kind of great questions you got. All right, question here on Facebook out of the start. Hey, Yolanda. Want to start my parasite cleansing drops. I've heard it's good to use a binder like activated charcoal. How many hours after a parasite drops can one drink activated charcoal caps? Great question. I typically do 2 hours after food and stops. 1 hour before is pretty good, just so we don't bind things up regarding the herbs or nutrients. If you know you're getting exposed acutely, you would obviously just do it right away. Or if you know you're drinking alcohol or some kind of a questionable food, you would do it with that food. It's not going to absorb everything, but it's definitely going to have some absorptive effects. And so if you're consuming a lot of nutrition or herbs that are killing, we don't want to affect that. So we want to try to do that away from it so we have the best effects in regards to absorbing toxins and not affecting herbs or nutrient support. Zinc and chloride need for stomach acid, anything else? So yeah, if you want to make more stomach acid, of course, zinc is going to be very, very important to make stomach acid. I talk about this in my Thyroid Reset book. Good high quality sea salt, right? We need good chlorides as well to make stomach acid. So half a teaspoon of high quality sea salt or Redmond's real salt every day in your water, once or twice a day. Salt your food liberally. Put a little pinch of sea salt in your water, just enough so you shouldn't taste it. You can always drink like a really good mineral water like Topo Chico. It's wonderful. It's filtered, pretty darn clean. It's basically Mexican Pellegrino, if you will. You get it in Texas, mineral water. But very good point. We want good chlorides in there. We want good building blocks. And of course, like a proton pump inhibitor, that's inhibiting hydrogen, which binds to chloride and makes hydrochloric acid, right? So that's how proton pump inhibitors work. They decrease that hydrogen synthesis, and that's going to decrease your stomach acid. Yeah, so if you have issues in the stomach and you have a lot of chronic inflammation there, it's possible to have B12 problems. Someone asked about B12 and intrinsic factor. So your parietal cells, the same cells in your stomach that make hydrochloric acid, also make intrinsic factor that binds to B12 when you take it in, and then it gets reabsorbed at the end of your small intestine called the ileum, and it reabsorbs it again. So if you have a lot of gut issues, you may not be making enough intrinsic factor to be able to bind to the B12, and then it catches it. It kind of does a relay race. It basically hands off the baton in the stomach called intrinsic factor that binds to B12, and then it basically tags the other runner at the end of the small intestine in the ileum where you reabsorb B12. And so consuming a good sublingual B12 can really help bypass that, or really good just methylated B12 can really help improve the absorption where you need less intrinsic factor to help it. And of course, if you have extreme gut inflammation, doing a B12 injection may even be necessary to maximize absorption. I like it. A hydroxylated or a methylated B12 or an adenosyl B12 is excellent. Okay, mom, 65. CAC of 150, doing low carb ginger, has been feeling lightheaded 24/7 the last month. Does electrolytes. What do you suggest at first to test to see what's happening? So the first thing I would do out of the gates is just some good quality sea salt minerals. I think is excellent out of the gates. Now in sea salt, you're going to get sodium chloride and a bunch of other trace minerals. I like Redmond's real salt. You can always throw in a little bit of potassium and magnesium. You're almost never going to get enough of those in your typical good quality sea salt. So good quality magnesium malate or a potassium bicarb or a potassium citrate, fine, that's good. And you can start to rev that up there, especially if you have heart issues or palpitations and or excessive cramping. You can almost guarantee there's some mineral issue. And we need good minerals for our cell membranes to work, right? We have this sodium potassium pump that helps our cells communicate. And basically, without that, our cells are not going to work properly. And we need the electrical conductivity of those good minerals to help our heart and our minerals and everything work electrically in our body. What if in the morning after drinking just water, you start burping? Could that still be a bacteria thing? So it depends. It's probably something going on from the night before. So the first thing I would do is just try drinking water like you are. You could also sip some ginger tea, and you may want to try doing a little bit of a fast, see if that makes that get better and come down. You may also want to do an elemental diet, because if your digestion is really stressed, doing a nice elemental healing powder can be helpful because everything's broken down. So there's no digestion your body has to really go under. Everything's there. We just keep the fermentable carbohydrates down. We make sure there's some good, decent fat and decent protein in like a free-form kind of composition. So there's no digestion that has to happen. So that can be really good. And you definitely want to look deeper at bacterial overgrowth and or fungal overgrowth or H. pylori. And when you drink your water, swing it around your mouth a little bit so your saliva imprints on it and then swallow it. Your body tends to absorb it when you have that DNA really impregnated on it. I just find that tends to be helpful. And try not to drink it so it's too cold. But I see that a lot. You just got to look deeper at the gut and what's going on. And try not to put too much in your tummy at one time. And the ginger tea can be very helpful for that because you can sip it. And ginger has a very nice antibacterial. It also has a very nice antispasmodic. It's also a natural prokinetic. It really keeps things moving in your intestines. And a lot of times when gastroparesis sets in and food sits in your stomach too long, the longer it's there, the greater likelihood it's going to ferment and gases are going to form. Good questions. Dr. J, I just started taking creatine monohydrate and I've been experiencing excessive swallow gas, bloating, nausea. I only took 5 milligrams for 2 days. What should I do? I would probably try it with food. I'd probably do it with food and see if your body assimilates it better when you have the food with it. And try to find the lowest dose that you can handle it and then taper it up. But try it with food. What do you think is the gold standard for a vitamin and mineral testing? Well, I think first is look at a lot of the minerals that you're consuming day in, day out. And just compare them on like a chronometer and see how much you're getting, right? It's not rocket science. If you're only consuming 2,500 milligrams of potassium a day, and we know the DRI says 4,700 milligrams, we know just start there. Or if you're not getting enough leafy greens and a good magnesium in, start there. Like there's some general low-hanging fruit that a good clinical nutritionist can kind of look at and evaluate and say, hey, just based on your diet, I know these things should be addressed. Now, outside of that, my favorite test would be a really good intercellular micronutrient test or an organic acid test to look at your nutrients and your various metabolic pathways. So I like a SpectraCell is a wonderful test. I like Genova makes a really good ion panel, or a NutriEval is wonderful. And of course, just a really good OAT or organic acid test is great. I like that out of the gates. But you can just getting someone on a really good diet and just looking at some of the clinical symptoms out of the gates, that can give you a really good window. If you're consuming lots of refined sugar and or grains, we're definitely going to have B vitamin problems. And so depending on if your diet's really good protein, really good green veggies, you're not over consuming carbs and sugar, then it's a pretty good platform to start from. And then a good multi, and then a good fish oil, and then from there some testing will really help fine-tune anything else that could be more of a long-term deficiency. What are the reasons, other than eating gluten, for high gluten antibodies, do you like wheat zoomer tests? I mean, wheat zoomer is another test that just looks at gluten sensitivity. I don't typically do tests like that because I just come from the place that everyone's going to be gluten sensitive in my book, right? And so if I start there, then we save a bit of money, because I like to do tests that actually change treatment. If it's not going to change treatment for me, it's just not a good use of a patient's money. Now, out of the gates, the best test, I think, for looking at gluten, if someone wants to be on it or not, is running the genetic test for gluten, right? Running the HLA-DQ2 at 8 and then alpha-1, beta-1 test is a better test to look at. Because if you have the genetics for gluten, the propensity for gluten sensitivity is always going to be there. And so because gluten, it's not like gluten has this awesome nutrient that you can't get in other really good foods, because it's inflammatory in nature, tends to have more anti-nutrients in it. Propensity for gluten sensitivity is very high. Because of that, there's other things where we can replace a lot of the nutrients that we would be getting in grains with other safe starches, with other healthy green vegetables. So there's not something in it that's overly beneficial. So because of it, because it causes more harm than good, then pull it out. And then the question is, well, can you throw gluten back in there down the road if you want to cheat, or your mom makes an amazing cannoli or something? Well, you got to just figure out how you respond afterwards. If you feel like you can recover inside of a day, maybe it's worth it around Christmas. If you have a gluten-free option, that's better, right? If you have a grain-free option, that's even better, right? A yuca or cassava, even better. So it just depends upon how well you recover, if you have an active autoimmune issue, and how good you feel when you're on it versus off it. Some people, they just feel absolutely terrible and they literally can't function. Those are people I say it's not worth it. Be more puritanical in that. Another question here. Above mom does include electrolytes, including sea salt, but lightheadedness stays all the time. Yeah, so you got to look at the adrenals, right? There's probably some mineral corticoid issues going on with the adrenals. When you have low mineral corticoids because your adrenals are stressed, it's harder to hold on to minerals. And so you got to look at the adrenals. Adrenals play a big role in that chronic lightheadedness kind of symptom. Could sore lymph nodes be a symptom of systemic inflammation? Potentially, right? When lymph nodes are chronically sore, there's some kind of an immune response happening in the lymphatic system, right? There are macrophages and monocytes already in the lymph. So when those things are active, something is happening. So we can look at bacteria. Stress is a big one out of the gates. Of course, viral stress could be as well. So the first thing I like for systemic lymph node issues is good ginger and getting the inflammation down in your diet if it's not already there. And then if we want to get the lymph moving better, we can always do whole body vibration, maybe some systemic enzymes like serrapeptidase. We could always add in some burdock, and ginger tea, of course, is great. Yeah, you're welcome. On the GPL, Mycotox gut 17, does that indicate environmental or food exposure, and how to best treat it? So I'm not sure what you mean by 17. Which mycotoxin? Was it ochratoxin A? Was it the citrinin? Which one was it? Was it ochratoxin? Was it aspergillus? There's a lot of different markers on that panel, and so I don't know what 17 means in regards to which marker that is. Maybe you want to elaborate. Can mold or parasites cause high gluten antibodies? So anytime you have stress in your body from a toxin like mold or an internal gut infection, your immune system could be more reactive. And so, yeah, there's a greater chance. Of course, there's more gut permeability as well. So when you have increased gut permeability, right, more leaky gut, foods can slip in, lipopolysaccharides can slip in. There's a greater chance your immune system can tag those things and overreact. That's definitely possible. So that's why part of the reason why you want to calm down everything before you go after the gut. Because if you go after gut infections and you're still eating gluten and things like that, your immune system is now more reacting. And then all the dead debris from killing off those infections now is moving to the bloodstream with an overactive immune system, can create more problems, right? Okay, so you said ochratoxin. Yeah, so what's the range on that? I think it's what? Anything greater than 20 is elevated. Is that correct? I just reviewed an ochratoxin or a mycotox panel just an hour ago. So that number, I think 20 is what sticks in my head, but let me know. I have trouble staying asleep. I wake up approximately every 2 hours during the night. So the first thing you want to look at is, again, I don't know where you're coming from. Diet has to be good. Hydration, lifestyle stressors, under control. First thing I look at is an adrenal cortisol rhythm to get a window where that's at. And we like to look at melatonin levels and serotonin-based amino acid levels, because that can tell me if melatonin and a lot of the brain nutrients for sleep are low. And if cortisol is too high, well, you're saying staying asleep. So if cortisol is too low around bedtime, it's possible blood sugar can drop, and that can cause a cortisol and adrenaline spike in the middle of the night and wake you up. So of course, lower cortisol going into sleep can cause high cortisol and low melatonin during sleep. So I really look at blood sugar and all of those things leading up to it. But I'm just assuming everything else is dialed in. Dr. J, you said that Pedialyte's trash because it contains high fructose corn syrup, but here in Canada it has dextrose rather than HFCS. Is that any better? Well, dextrose is still corn sugar, right? So in general, if you want, like your natural, Mother Nature's Pedialyte is going to be coconut water, all right? Coconut water is excellent. It's very high in potassium. If you want, you can throw a little bit of extra magnesium powder in there or really good trace mineral sodium chloride in there as well, and you're pretty much covered. People that typically go after things like that are when they're incredibly dehydrated, hot day, or maybe they have excessive diarrhea and they're losing electrolytes. That's where it's a good time to do that. Range was 7 on mine, 17 total is really high. Yeah, so you really want to look at the mold toxins. If you have high levels of ochratoxin, you got to look at why. So figure out if it's an active issue, right? Do you live in a moldy home or apartment? Any history of water leaks or any active mold that you can see? Any history of chronic high humidity, even in the winter months? Just kind of rule that out. It could be a previous thing. If it's a previous thing, it's easier. We just work on lowering those mold levels once you're stable with your health. I don't ever go after lowering mold unless everything is stable first, because mold toxins can be stressful on the body. So I like to get everything dialed in first. And you can always do things like infrared sauna too. Your mom tested vitamin D at 117. That's a little high. If there's autoimmune issues or cancer issues, 70 to 100 is good. So I would just pull off her vitamin D. Probably she's good for the rest of the winter. Time April hits, mid-March to April, her levels will probably be down to 70 or so. Retest her in 2 months just to make sure she's good. Hope it helps. And then also, really, vitamin D toxicity is be more of a problem when you're not getting enough vitamin A and K. So if you know her levels are a little bit higher with the D, just try to get a little bit extra cod liver oil and good quality vitamin K in there, and that will prevent any toxicity issues. But you should be okay with that. All right, guys, Dr. J here signing off. Hope you enjoyed the content and the info. You want to dive in deeper, click down below here to help y'all. And thumbs up is appreciated, comments below, and you guys have a phenomenal day.